Hello everyone, and thank you for attending the latest Edinburgh Fortean Society online meeting. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Gordon Rutter and I organise these meetings. Normally we would meet on the second Tuesday of the month here in Edinburgh in a pub, and that would be at 7:30. Obviously at the moment we're not able to do that. We will return to normal when conditions are right, but we're trying to keep that schedule of meeting on the second Tuesday of every month at 7:30 just to keep everyone on the ball. So that's when we're releasing these videos. For this particular offering, we've got a range of different people speaking, and I'm incredibly grateful to all of them because the talk that had been scheduled unfortunately fell through at the last moment, and I put out a quick call to people and I got some excellent responses. So thank you very much for everyone who's contributing. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the first meeting of the Edinburgh Fortean Society Book Club, and here are some recommendations from Edinburgh Fortean Society members of their favourite Fortean books and books that have influenced them. Thank you very much. Our first entry into the Edinburgh Fortean Book Club is from a long-term friend of the Society and frequent speaker, and it's somebody that a number of you have met before. He's spoken at normal events, he's spoken at our day conferences, and he's also spoken as part of our online presence as well. And it's Richard Freeman from the Centre for Fortean Zoology. He's one of these people who isn't just an armchair Fortean cryptozoologist in Richard's case. He actually goes out and carries out investigations, carries out expeditions, etc., etc. And he's written a number of excellent books himself as well about the work that he's done. But here he is to talk about some of the books that have influenced him. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Freeman.
Hi. Well, if you're asking me about my favourite Fortean books, um, I'm a bibliophile. I would need the lifespan of the Doctor if I were to ever read all the books that I've got. And for every book I read, I must get about another 10. So I live in a bedsit in Exeter, and it looks like something out of Life of Grime with Mr. Trebus. If you replace the rubbish with piles of books that I have no more room to to put on shelves or anywhere. If you look at the background uh, as I'm sitting here, you would see masses and masses of books everywhere, fiction and non-fiction. So choosing Fortean books, my favourite, is quite a task. But the one that springs to mind immediately is Tony Healy and Paul Cropper's Out of the Shadows Mystery Animals of Australia, which is quite a rarity these days. And I ordered mine from Fortean Times donkeys years ago in the 90s when it first came out, and it took ages to come. And it had a very low print run, so they change hands online now for absurd prices. And I've said to Tony Healy, who's a friend of mine, with a CFZ, I'll reprint it, but he says, "Oh well, I'm keeping a few copies back for my retirement to flog them." But it is an absolutely great book. Tony and Paul really do the legwork, like Lauren Coleman did in the 70s in America, in his book Curious Encounters and Mysterious America, which are both very good books as well. They've gone and investigated things firsthand. And in Out of the Shadows, they have chapters on the bunyip, the Tasmanian wolf in Tasmania, and the Tasmanian wolf on mainland Australia, big cats in Australia, and also the yowie, the wild man of Australia. The only thing they didn't tackle was Australian sea serpents, and they said that is purely because because of room, and one day they want to write a book about Australian sea serpents. But it's a cracking book with so many personal interviews in that they've done themselves with witnesses that you wouldn't find anywhere else because no one else has talked to them. They've gone and hunted these witnesses down and spoke to them. And a lot of them have seen things that have left them very rattled, even years after the encounters. One guy was called Bill O'Chee, who became a senator in Australia. And for a politician to admit he's seen something like this could wreck his career, but he came forward and did an interview with them and put his hand up and said, yeah, I saw a yowie. And he was one of a group of school children who, together with their teacher, was staying at a lodge in a forested area, if I remember correctly, in the Blue Mountains. And all of them saw this massive hair-covered ape-like creature sort of making threatening gestures, tearing up small trees and shrubs. And it seemed like the guy that ran the place knew what it was and was afraid of it and had seen it before. But that's just one of the many, many great interviews in it. And the people that have seen the Tasmanian wolf and seen it up close and good and couldn't mistake it for anything else. It's an absolutely great book if you can get hold of a copy. Because too many books, I think, are written by people who just sit in front of a computer and you never get out and do the legwork. And Tony and Paul have certainly done that. So that's an absolutely brilliant book. So that would be one of my choices. Another one would be pretty obviously On the Track of Unknown Animals and In the Wake of the Sea Serpents, because by Dr. Bernd Heuvelmans, because without those we wouldn't really have cryptozoology the way we have it today. They were the first major cryptozoological books. There were books on the subject written before by people like Willie Ley, for instance, but these were the first widely sold ones, translated from French into English, and they're whacking great things like doorstops, and they're full of fantastic accounts with creatures like the giant anaconda and the yeti and possible survival of mammoths in Siberia, all kinds of creatures. And in the wake of the sea serpents, he classifies sea serpents in a certain way, which I don't entirely agree with. I mean, it must be said, in the wake of the sea serpents, he does sort of bend some of the sightings to fit in with his categories, when really it should be the other way around. I don't really agree with his categories. He's too fond of the marine mammal theory for me. But it's a great read in so much as it's the biggest collection of sea serpent accounts ever committed to paper. And they go from virtually when written records began up until the 1960s. I mean, there have been other books afterwards that have took it up from there and collected sightings from the 60s onwards. But the Wake of the Sea Serpents is a massive information, as is On the Track of Unknown Animals. He really has, from all over the world, dug out these wonderful accounts. What else? The Missing 411 series by David Poliades. Some hair-raising stuff in that. David Poliades, a former cop, got involved with disappearances in national parks in America and found out that rangers were telling him that something's going on, that they don't know what it is, but they think the higher-ups have an idea and they don't want to tell people because it would stop the revenue they get from people coming into national parks. He's found out that they don't have a computer list of people that have disappeared in national parks, which is really bizarre. And some of these disappearances are very, very strange indeed. He's excluded the ones where people have been attacked by wolves or pumas or grizzly bears or whatever, where people have drowned and stuff. But now there are something like 10 of these volumes, and hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people go missing and continue to go missing under very weird circumstances. And he doesn't say what he thinks it is. And in fact, I think there's probably several different things at work here. But some of these stories are really creepy, like the story of there's a woman called Evelyn Consuelo Roseman, who was attacked by something in Yosemite National Park. And whatever that thing was that attacked her picked her up and flung her off a cliff, but flung her with something that was far, far, far in excess of human strength. And basically, you can't beat around the bush with that. Afterwards, rape the corpse, rape the mangled corpse. And it is one of the most horrible and hair-raising stories you will ever hear in Forteana. And I have a feeling that whatever ever did that wasn't human, or not Homo sapien anyway. But most of these cases, people just vanish, and sometimes they vanish incredibly quickly. Like, there have been cases of both children and adults where they've been walking in line and only 50 to 100 feet between them, and someone looks back and the person's vanished, completely gone. And it, more than any other book or series of books, the Missing 411 books leave a sense of sort of a brooding dread that something malevolent is going on, something intelligent and malevolent is going on, and that the authorities have some kind of knowledge of it. I don't go in for conspiracy theories really, other than the British media having it in for Jeremy Corbyn. But apart from that, it does seem that the park authorities and the government probably know that there's something very, very strange going on in the national parks of North America, and it's probably more than one cause. But then he goes wider and starts looking in other countries as well, Australia, Britain, Canada, South America, and they're getting similar, very odd disappearances, people vanishing under the noses of other people. And the weird thing is, when they find bodies, if they find remains, they often find them in places that have been checked again and again and again. That's a reoccurring thing with the missing 411 cases. They'll bring in the search authorities who do a very thorough job. They can't find anybody, and then all of a sudden the body will turn up at a place that they've checked multiple times. Another factor is that the dogs they have with them turn back from the trail, and these dogs live for what they do, sniffing out people, and to them it's a game, they love it, but they seem to become very frightened by something. And also weird weather, after someone disappears, the weather seems to change, and it becomes very snowy or very stormy very quickly, and you get these weird patterns emerging, and it's utterly baffling and compelling and very disturbing. So I can thoroughly recommend those.
Thank you very much for those, Richard. I think nobody would be particularly surprised, knowing you, that those were the books you recommend. Next, we have Stuart Smith. Stu is again well known to everyone in the group, I imagine. Stu is one of the few founder members of the group who's still around. Stu was at that very first inaugural meeting in 1999, and consequently, I've known Stu for a heck of a long time. Actually predates that meeting, and if you'd asked me to predict which book it was that he was going to recommend, I think I would have been pretty much spot on. So to hear exactly which book it is that he's coming up with, here's Stu Smith. Thank you.
Okay. Hi there, this is Stuart Smith. I'm speaking to you direct from Professor Quaitmatis's laboratory. So the book I'm going to talk about is the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. Amazing piece of work. I guess most people are probably talking about non-fiction book. Although I love some Fortean non-fiction, and obviously Charles Fort's books themselves. I'm really a fiction guy, and this brings together all of the sort of things I love. There's science fiction, there's fantasy, there's conspiracy theories, there's all sorts of bad stuff going on in this book, drugs and sex and everything like that, right? So the Illuminatus trilogy is made up from 3 books: The Eye in the Pyramid, The Golden Apple, and Leviathan. Eye in the Pyramid being a reference to the symbol on the American dollar bill. The Golden Apple is a reference to the goddess Eris and the start of the Trojan War story. The apple with Callisti to the fairest written on it, that she rolled into the party of the gods. When the female gods in that party were arguing over who was going to get it. They grabbed Paris and got him to decide for them, and in return he was given the most beautiful woman in the world, who was Helen, and started off all the problems. So Robert Anton Wilson, especially, I don't know if Robert Shea ever wrote for Fortean Times, but Raw was a regular contributor back in the day, and I think that's probably how I first heard about the books, and then I bought them around about 1995, and then quickly became obsessed with all of the ideas within it. It's kind of a spin-off and a dramatization of something called, and excuse my French, Operation Mindfuck, which was started by Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill, who also started the fake religion, the Discordians, based on worshipping Eris, who's goddess of chaos, or Eris Discordia. So Operation Mindfuck was basically a meta-conspiracy, a satire on conspiracy theories, which said that the Illuminati were the secret rulers of the world, and behind all of the conspiracy theories and everything that was going on in the world. Some of you may have heard about this because it featured quite heavily in Adam Curtis's most recent set of documentaries, Can't Get You Out of My Head. Maybe he's put a bit too much weight on what the influence that had on it, but Kerry Thornley was had Jim Garrison believing that he was involved in the conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, and I think Thornley knew Lee Harvey Oswald, for example. Anyway, so it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. A great rip-roaring raunchy read. I mean, it just bowls over, involves a sort of mastermind with a golden submarine that you can go anywhere around the world, with a pet dolphin called Howard. What else is in it? Yeah, it's just amazing. Anyway, it's difficult to describe how great it is. And thinking about it again now, it's been a couple of years since I read it again, so I am going to go and try and read it again. It's usually a fairly quick read. It may be, about 800 pages, but it rollicks along at a great pace. Has all sorts of things from hard-boiled detective stuff to a music festival with hundreds of names for bands. I think some bands have definitely had their names being picked out from this book in the past. I highly recommend it. Go and check it out. Okay, bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Stu. As I say, very much a book I could have predicted that you would recommend, but an excellent book, so we can see why you've recommended it as well. Next up, we've got Joel Conn. Joel is a member of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research and a long-term member of the Folklore Society as well. Joel has been to a number of events at the Edinburgh Fortean Society as well. And he's recommending a book that previously I'd not been aware of, but based on his recommendation, it's definitely something that I'm going to have a look out for. So, Joel.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'll be joining you in person, but I'm leaving on holiday the next day, so you'll forgive me if I don't dial in for this meeting. The book I'm not going to talk about, but I did think of first, was The Vanishing Hitchhiker by Jan Hal Brunvand, which the reason I'm choosing not to talk about it is because there was obviously a talk a few sessions ago about urban legends, so perhaps all urban legend out. But that book was very influential for me in my interest in folklore and contemporary legend, and also probably when I changed from the childhood interest in things that were weird to start looking at things a little bit more critically, and people's beliefs and things people tell each other, and what witnesses say is true, and perhaps are just repeating things that they've heard or how they're interpreting it. But the book I want to talk about is Bad Blood by John Carreyrou, which hopefully, I'm not sure it's coming out brilliantly, but there we go. And and this is my edition of it, a paperback edition that came out a couple of years ago. Winner of the Financial Times McKinsey Business Book of the Year Award 2018, Bad Blood, Secret and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. Kerry Yu is an investigative journalist on Wall Street Journal, so anyone who likes books where the journalists are the good guys, the sort of All the President's Men type books, or the film Spotlight, things like that, where they're tracking down, looking for the truth and getting to the bottom of a story where people don't want them to know the truth. That's a book for you. There's also a little bit of a kind of legal thriller element to it, because within it there's lots of aggressive legal tactics to try and silence critics and such like. And as a court lawyer, I find that element interesting. But the book itself, to give the very brief outline for those who don't know about it, is about a company called Theranos, and they are very charismatic founder, Elizabeth Holmes. She was a Stanford University engineering dropout who founded this startup, again, a kind of similar to the Facebook story of an idea from her dorm room. And the idea was having a home testing kit, maybe this size, where you would be able to put in just a pinprick of blood and it would test for all manner of things, not just your blood chemistry, but all manner of diseases and such like it would test for. And you would have this in your home. It would link up to your doctor. If you were on medication that required you to have more or less, depending on your blood levels, your doctor could be monitoring this in real time. It truly was a sort of disruptive technology of the sort that people like so much in Silicon Valley. And that's where she was based, in Silicon Valley. And that becomes slightly relevant in the story later on. Now, the idea is the story, the book tells us 10-year journey from her of the startup when she's feted as this tech disruptor. She becomes the youngest ever, at least on paper, youngest ever self-made female billionaire, and she ends indicted on federal criminal charges with investors having lost $1 billion. Now, the product, first it's called the Edison, then she develops another one called the Mini Lab. It's very slick looking. She has ex-Apple designers brought in at the start to design it, a lot of it looking at the interface to make it user-friendly and simple. And this dream of having it in people's homes, but then she also looks at it being inside doctor surgeries or inside wellness clinics. She has a big tie-in with Walgreens, a huge pharmaceutical, like their Boots, but much, much bigger in America. And people would have these centers where they would go in with just a tiny pinprick. They could monitor their levels for sugar, for tests for illnesses and such like. And she has this big tie-in. Now, it's a revolutionary idea, and the difficulty with the revolutionary idea is that it wasn't just disruptive technology. It flew in the face of all other blood testing technology. People just in the know just thought it wouldn't work. But Holmes is a compelling figure. She was a compelling character. There's a young, conventionally beautiful woman. She dressed in the black polo necks, looked like Steve Jobs style. There's a wonderful bit in it where it describes how she seems to lower her voice to sound more like Steve Jobs, to sound more commanding. This idea that she effectively changes her whole persona, including her voice, to fit in with this model that's in her mind of the tech disruptor. She has this high-profile board of advisors, people like Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, none of whom are really that into biochemistry, to the degree that really no one's involved in biochemistry. And she has these huge contracts with Walgreens and such like. And the element of it is that it's a parlor trick. Now, how much did she know it was a parlor trick? How much did she realize that technology would never work? Silicon Valley often goes on this fake it till you make it basis. And was she faking it till she made it? Or did she really realize early on that it was never going to happen? But the book tells these wonderful breakdown that Kerry goes through, how she faked it, how she managed to compartmentalize the business structures in the business. So one team didn't realize how the other team was failing. They thought everything was fine. Everyone was signing NDAs. It was complete secrecy within the business, and especially without, and slowly how the story comes out. So why do I think it's a Fortean book? I think it's a Fortean book because we've got all the aspects that we see frequently in Fortean times of human psychology, how people could be tricked into things, how people can self-delude themselves. We certainly have damned data, to use the term from the man himself. We have the data that's damned, but what's the data that's damned is that her own data, which shows that the product isn't working. But one of the most compelling bits of the whole thing that feels like this confidence trick, it's really how people are so trusting, is when it's in Walgreens, people are not just going away with a blood stick in their finger. They're getting venous draws of blood. They are actually going in, expecting one thing, getting something else, and merrily walking on the way. They're being told that they're going to go in only getting a pinprick of blood. They're not, and everyone kind of shrugs and moves on, because this kind of compelling sense of really being told that this is the right thing and this is what it is, and being told black is white and just nodding and moving on. The view that she really may have injured people with health because their testing was just so out the ordinary, it just wasn't working. They were doing things that just weren't what was appropriately done with blood chemistry testing, which I can't comment on. I'm not a specialist in that, but Kerry talks you through it in a very straightforward way. And this sense of the science of the scientists saying this can't work. Are they just simply doing what scientists are often blamed of doing, of wanting to keep with convention, not look for something exciting and new? But in this case, they were right. That there's a line that I've heard about. It might be in the book. I've heard it elsewhere, which is the reason that people don't get Nobel Prizes for medicine until they're quite late in their career, is that you really have to build on and build on and build on things. And here was a dropout with no real background in blood chemistry, getting $1 billion into her company to develop something that all the other scientists in the field say it wouldn't work, and which wasn't working. And everyone was still just kind of deluded, not looking at the man behind the curtain as it was, or in this case, the woman behind the curtain. So I think there's a lot of Fortean themes there. It's certainly a very compelling book, and it's an easy read. I read it far too fast, one of those books where you get to the end and you really wish there was another 10 chapters to go. There's a lot more out there. You can, if you don't feel like going for the book or you can't find it in your library, just Google her. There's a lot of good stories and Vanity Fair and things like that. And we may not have seen the end of Elizabeth Holmes as well. The idea that she's kind of seamlessly moved back into a kind of upwardly mobile lifestyle in California. The fact that Silicon Valley maybe forgives people quite quickly. The issue about Silicon Valley was that's not where biotech is. It's in a different place. So she was placing a biotech company where there was no other biotech. And again, that helped to kind of fuel the delusion, because the people around were not scrutinizing her. They were not medical journalists looking into it. They were tech journalists who just looked at the gadget and believed the hype to a large extent. So the way she moved, and maybe continuing to move. But also the thing I think I took out of it very recently was I had to go for a COVID test, which was wonderfully negative. And as I'm sitting gagging myself, sticking it down my throat and up my nostril, just thinking how much better it would be if there was just a wee gadget that I could easily take some sort of sample very quickly, and it would just churn away in my home and give me a test. And I realized I'd heard of such a gadget. It's in this book. It's called the Mini Lab or the Edison. So she has an idea which is incredibly compelling, and maybe we will see it in future, but it wasn't ready and the technology wasn't ready for her. And she's still facing the charges. I don't think that's resolved yet. So the story of the rise and fall of therapists and Elizabeth Holmes, John Carew, Bad Blood, recommended to everyone. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that recommendation, Joel. A book that I'm certainly going to have a look out for. It does sound really, really fascinating. Our next speaker is James Kerr. James is again well known to everyone in the Edinburgh Fortean Society, and he's talking again about a book that I wouldn't have been able to predict the exact book, but I think I would have got the category. So thank you very much, James.
Good evening and welcome to my Fortean book report, which will, of course, be on Witchcraft for All by Louise Hubner. I realise, because of my technical inabilities, that you out there through the looking glass in Mirrorland are seeing this in reversal vision. But the handy thing is, if you then read out the text, the whole text of this front page as you see it there, makes its own spell. Also, see what you're focusing on, you filthy animals. Louise Hubner was declared official witch of Los Angeles for the purpose of blessing a music festival being put on by the council to try and engender goodwill with the local youth. She then became something of a thorn in their side by considering that the title was bestowed in perpetuity as opposed to for the duration of the one day of the festival, which is what the council intended. But it did not say that in the official declaration scroll that they gave her. She doesn't cover this in the book, but some advice there when you're entering into magical contracts, make sure you read all the small print. In this book, Louise Hubner advocates dispensing completely with all the expected paraphernalia of witchcraft. She doesn't recognise the requirement for or even the existence of covens. She considers witchcraft to be a real physical force which the individual can access through mental strength and language, triggers of language. It's very close to a modern self-help book in places. For example, this is how this passage starts. For example, everybody has heard wise psychologists advise, relax, be yourself. That's the surest route to nowhere ever advocated. Don't relax, do just the opposite. Get yourself all keyed up. The keyed up, emotionally turned on you is the best you the world will ever see. Relax, what for? You should never even pick up the phone without being turned on. Never do anything without turning on. Turning on isn't going to make you die any sooner. In fact, it sustains life. All of those little things can add up to failure. The limp voice on the telephone, shuffling across the floor with slippers flapping, that's just not necessary. So a prohibition against flappy slippers is quite a long way from obtaining instruction from a dark lord, I would say. There are chapters, very detailed, serious chapters on card reading and numerology. Some stuff on horoscopes too. The last section of the book, I believe, is taken from letters written to her radio show, which ran for a good few years in the Los Angeles area. In that, people write to her and ask for translations of what they say are ancient Sumerian texts or instructions on how to deal with the demon Grinchavour who's appearing in their room. She more or less just laughs at them, comes back to this notion of an individual being in control of the whole thing. I'd recommend this. If you are good at casting spells, like I am, you might be able to get this for £15. Otherwise, I've seen it going for upwards of 100. But despite the hexploitation cover, it's a great book and I heartily recommend it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. Another worthy entry to the Edinburgh Fortean Society Book Club. Next, we have Innes Smith. Innes has again spoken several times to the Edinburgh Fortean Society, and Innes is also the president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, who meet over in Glasgow. Innes is going to give us a range of books. Like me, he found it difficult to pin it down to just one book, so we've got a veritable roundup of Forteana from Innes. So, Innes Smith, thank you.
Everyone. Thanks for asking me. So I'm going to do this quickly. We've just mentioned this as like top of the pops. I'm going to do a top of the pops rundown. So in at number 14, we have, so this is an absolute Fortean classic. This is Charles Mackay, and it's basically, yeah, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it's basically, it's fantastic because it's loads of different subjects. So it covers things like financial bubbles, but also lots of good stuff about magicians and also poltergeists and hauntings and all sorts of fruity stuff. But the real bonus is it's basically written in the 1850s. So the real character of a pompous Victorian git comes through. So it's a pleasure to read. This one is a Fortean classic, Patrick Harper. So if you want to know lots of really weird experiences and weird paranormal accounts, then this is a really great collection. And in a very similar Fortean vein, we also have Mike Dash out in Borderlands. So that's full of really good stuff. So if you want a sort of a collection, a selection of paranormal stuff, that's classic. On to ufology. Obviously, John A. Keel's The Mothman Prophecies. Just fruity magnificence. If you've never read it, treat yourself. It's delicious. It's bonkers. It's wonderful. Talking about bonkers, delicious, wonderful. Also, Dion Fortune. It's a sort of Mary Violet Firth was a sort of therapist, basically, a sort of Edwardian age onwards, and a contemporary of Crowley. And she wrote this book, Psychic Self-Defense. Now, it seems it's got that sort of supermarket magazine stand vibe to it, that it's cheap and nasty, but it's great. It's full of really, really good anecdotes from sort of occultism and mysticism, and really good sound advice. It reminds you that a lot of good psychical advice is good psychological advice. That's one of the cliches I come out with, but basically good psychical advice is good psychological advice. Anyway, on to me being very loyal now. This is the late Archie E. Roy, Professor Roy, and this is his book, his first sort of smorgasbord of paranormal oddness and a sense of something strange. So not only do you get an Alistair Gray cover into the bargain, but it's got one of my favorite poltergeist stories in it, which is basically the poltergeist of Maxwell Park, and it's really, really great. It never got the same amount of press as, let's say, the Enfield poltergeist or something like that, but an amazing case full of really fruity, weird, odd experiences. And Archie was there. Classic. Don't know why they don't make that into a thing. Anyway, talking about classics of a sort of haunting genre. So this is written by another professor, funnily enough, David Hufford, and this is The Terror That Comes in the Night. And the thing that really, this is about sort of old hag, supernatural attack, haunting experiences. In fact, I think the subtitle is An Experience-Centered Study of Supernatural Assault Traditions. Oh, how's that for a subtitle? But the good thing about this is it really gets across the power of the transcribed interview. This is people talking about their experiences in their own words, and it's fantastic. But what's wonderful is how odd these experiences are. Even though these experiences are sort of dismissed as purely psychological, there's something really odd about them. And that's basically the point that David Hufford says. He says, this isn't just psychological, there's something more in here. Anyway, Colin Wilson, Poltergeist. He also wrote the occult classic, but this is him just drilling down on poltergeist cases, full of so much fruity goodness and also a bit of theoretical musing, which is quality. Right, very, very quickly going through spiritualism here. If you're interested in spiritualism, the birth of spiritualism, then basically this man, Frank Podmore, does it for you. And it is Modern Spiritualism, a History and Criticism, 2 volumes. So there's a lot of reading in there, but it's absolutely fantastic. Read that. And if you want all of that, but some really fruity gossip about it, then Trevor Hall, he was a member of the SPR, somewhat skeptical. But these books, The Strange Case of Edmund Gurney and The Spiritualists, it's just, do you know what it is? It's throbbing gossip. You'll love it. You've got to read these. You've got to read these. Awesome, right? So this man wrote 3 books on paranormal subjects, and they're not really, they're right up there, basically. I wouldn't say they're the best books ever written on the subjects, but they're basically right up there. And it's basically Jim Schnabel or Schnabel, I don't know how you pronounce it, but anyway, he wrote one about crop circles. He wrote an absolute class about the psychic spies, but this is the one that he wrote about alien abduction, Dark White, and it's absolutely brilliant. And the wonderful thing is he talks about, there was this sort of Brooklyn Bridge alleged abduction case that made the news. But the real story of what happened was absolutely enthralling. And he writes about this because he was one of the investigators. And spoiler alert, it was all made up. But the story of how it was all made up was absolutely fascinating. Yeah. Somebody else that investigated the Brooklyn Bridge. See, there's a link. See, I've done this seamlessly. And in at number one, another investigator that investigated this case, as in properly, it was George P. Hansen. And George P. Hansen wrote this book, The Trickster and the Paranormal, and it's a bit of a weighty tome. But and now we'll have in the Radio 1 theme, we'll have on the sad My Tune music. Was it Simon Bates did that? Well, as most people will know, you get to a stage when you read so many books in the paranormal and you think, I'm not actually getting there. We're not getting the answer. There's no such thing as the evidence. There's not just one white crow that proves it all. It's almost like it's like the bar of soap in the bathtub. Why is that? And he was really the first. There he is, little man in a sharp suit, 1950s style. But basically, he's still around. But he basically wrote a book about that. Why are we not getting any further? Why is the evidence elusive? And he tied it into the sort of cultural, mythological phenomenon of the trickster. And it's such a good book. It's filled with so many fascinating paranormal accounts of just constant weirdness. It's still full of like bookmarks and absolutely love it. It's got ufology, it's got hauntings, it's got poltergeists, it's even got a wee bit about D&D. I know, it's got everything. But anyway, it's a great book. Heartily recommend it. That's my number one. So, yeah, I hope that was good enough for you. Hope you're taking notes. Don't have to. Just, I'm sure you can watch this video all again. But anyway, thanks for inviting me and happy Fortean reading. Bye.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Innes. Quite a lot for people to think about there. Really appreciate that. Next, we've got another long-term member of the Edinburgh Fortean Society. The category of book that this person is going to be talking about will come as absolutely no surprise to anyone. What will come as a surprise is he's actually phoning in this message from the Standing Stones at Callanish. So, ladies and gentlemen, Scott Lyle.
Right, my choice is Alien Animals by Janet and Colin Board. This is a book I discovered when I was about maybe 12 or 13. I remember buying it in a Remainder bookshop in Stirling, and it was initially the cover that attracted me. It had a Bigfoot, long neck Loch Ness Monster style creature, a big cat, and a snarling hellhound, and a sort of bat-wing kind of monstrosity. So as a kid, I was really into monsters, and that cover sort of really drew me in. So I bought it and spent the rest of it was a caravan holiday reading the book, and we were in a caravan on the edge of a dark forest, and the contents really creeped me out. It's a book about cryptozoology. It's got 5 chapters, one on like loch monsters, one on alien big cats, one on black phantom black dogs, one on ape men, kind of Bigfoot type creatures, and a sort of final chapter and conclusions that draws parallels between the different sorts of phenomenon, the sort of parallels between how a lot of these creatures have similar sort of things in common and how they might actually be stranger than sort of phantom animals. So it's the first time I came across things like Mothman, the Owl Man. So it's really about reduction to cryptozoology, and it was also about reduction to this being potentially something stranger than unknown animals. It's got things like I knew about Bigfoot. I'd seen Boggy Creek. I was already fascinated by Bigfoot at that age, but it introduced me to things like the Yeren, the Yowie, the Almasti, the sort of various African and South American Bigfoot type creatures as well. So it's a book that stayed with me to this day. In fact, next month's talk, which is Planet of the Mystery Apes, which is a talk I'm giving, I'm actually drawing on material that I'd first read in this book. This is a book I think I maybe first bought it about maybe 1988, 1989. So yeah, I highly recommend it. as I say, particularly if you're into cryptozoology, where it meets high strangeness, I thoroughly recommend that book. In fact, I like it so much. It's had such an impact on my life. I actually have the Bigfoot from the cover's face tattooed on my leg, so I'd highly recommend that. The second book I'd recommend is this is a much newer book. It's The Old Stones, and it's published from the Megalithic Portal. It's edited by Andy Burnham, and it's a really good guidebook to find yourself stone circles and megalithic sites. As I speak to you just now, I'm actually on the Isle of Lewis on holidays, and we've been using this book. It's a really excellent guidebook, really easy to use. We've been using that to find sites to visit while we've been here. So that's an old book and a newish kind of book. So that'll be my two choices.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott. An absolutely excellent book, and like all the other books we've heard about so far, I would strongly urge people to seek it out and to have a read of it themselves. Next up, we've got another frequent contributor to the Edinburgh Fortean Society, and again somebody whose book I would have been probably 100% spot on, let's be honest. So ladies and gentlemen, here we have Charles Paxton.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Paxton, if you don't know me, but the Fortean book I'd like to talk about today is In the Wake of the Sea Serpents by Bernard Heuvelmans. So my interest is in sea monster accounts, and this is the definitive compendious catalogue of sea serpents. It's a monumental work of scholarship. Heuvelmans tried very, very hard to find as many reports as he could. He didn't have the internet available to him, so he doesn't always find the primary sources, but nevertheless, it was a tremendous work to go all around the world to find some really quite obscure sources of sea serpent accounts. He had some historical precedents to base his work on. He had Udermann's Compendium of Sea Serpent Reports, but he added tremendously to that. He added an extra kind of century's worth of reports to it. So it is a phenomenal work of scholarship, a phenomenal catalogue, a phenomenal history of sea serpents. It's not just a history of sea serpents, in fact. It actually has two parts to it. The first part actually is a sort of compendious history of giant squids and the history of the kraken, based on his French book. In fact, the whole book is based on two French books. One was a book on the giant squid and kraken. The other one was a book on the history of the sea serpent. So it's kind of a combination of the two translated into English. So this is without doubt my favourite Fortean book. It is not, however, without its problems. If we consider the history of the kraken and the giant squid first, it's an incredibly biased history. It takes the view that science rejected the idea of the giant squid until 1857, and the formal description of the giant squid by the Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup, and that's just not true. I mean, he failed to miss. I don't think it was an intentional omission, but I think he failed to realise that there was a scientific history of krakens prior to a scientific description of giant squid prior to 1857. And far from it being true that science rejected the idea of giant squids, whilst French scientists might have done, I'm not even sure that's true, certainly scientists from other nations didn't reject the idea of a giant squid. And we know that because there were papers being written about giant squid in the 18th century. And of course, Joseph Banks, who was the personification of the British scientific establishment at the tail end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, he actually ate a giant squid, well, not a giant squid, but a large squid, whilst on an expedition with James Cook in the Pacific. So scientists, natural philosophers, in the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, if they knew about the Cook expedition, they would know that giant squids exist. They would know about Schreider-Dyer's paper about giant squid that occurred in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. So it does miss out a little bit of the history of the giant squid. In addition, I and some other people, I think, would argue that Hooverman's classification of sea serpents is a little bit arbitrary. It's not based on any kind of statistical idea, which is fair enough, perhaps, because he didn't have the resources to do that in the late 1960s when this was being compiled. But even as in this kind of qualitative classification system, it doesn't really work. Perhaps for two reasons. One reason is that he's trying to classify animals when really we don't know the animals exist. You should be trying to classify reports. And secondly, he kind of shoehorns. He's desperately trying to say, well, this sighting belongs to this category, and this sighting belongs to this category, and this sighting belongs to this category. And sometimes it's just awkward, him trying to push these particular reports. So there's one, for example, where he says that a hard-shelled thing with 4 paws that snapped at things, which sounds to me a bit like a turtle, which is found off the coast of Denmark, is a baby version of his super otter, which is a super flexible northern thing that looks a bit like an otter, which could be a sea serpent. I mean, it seems a bit contrived that a small hard-shelled thing becomes a big, could grow up to become a big super otter. And so, first-class compendium, first-class history, albeit a bit biased, in the sense that no one else had done the work at that point. But maybe the analysis could have been improved upon even at the time, but certainly now it's a little bit out of date. Nevertheless, if you're interested in cryptozoology, if you're interested in marine cryptozoology, if you're interested in aquatic cryptozoology, this book is an essential part of your library. You cannot do without this book. And in fact, if you're interested in cryptozoology, you really should have a library of Hooverman's books, because they are, he was integral to the creation of the field of study, science, if you wish, pseudoscience, if you're the editors of Wikipedia. Science denialism, if you're one of the recent copies of New Scientist. Whatever you feel about cryptozoology, if you're interested in cryptozoology, Hooverman's books really are an essential part of your library. I'm interested in aquatic cryptozoology, so this is my favorite one, but of course he did write books about the abominable snowman and on the track of unknown animals, which is a whole terrestrial thing. Now I'm thinking, did he write a book about the abominable snowman? I may be wrong about that. I can't remember whether he wrote a book about the abominable snowman. I don't really follow the abominable snowman. But anyway, if you're interested in aquatic cryptozoology, this is an essential part of your library. I don't know how easily it can. I've got 2 copies, so I don't need any more. So I don't know how much it currently costs on secondhand bookshops. But if you can get a copy of Bernald Hooverman's In the Wake of the Sea Serpents, a first-class Fortean tome. Cheerio.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Charles. As I say, a book that I think anyone who knows you would have predicted that would have been the one that you chose. Thank you. So we've heard from quite a few people, so I guess it's my turn now. And like a number of people, I found it very, very difficult to pin it down to just one single book. So I'm going to take the Innes Smith approach, and I'm going to give you a number of different books as well. And some of them I'm recommending for all sorts of different reasons. And in a couple of cases, I've actually got some books that are series rather than individual books. So the first book I've got here is Mysteries of the Unexplained, courtesy of the Reader's Digest. It's actually packed full of so much information that it's invaluable. It's a book that can be dipped into and out of any time of the day, any time of night, and whatever your interests, it's got something on. It's It's just packed full of things. And unlike a lot of these similar compilation books, it actually tells you where it got the information from. So if you want to follow any of these up and find out a little bit more about the particular story, then it's fairly easy to do so. So that's Mysteries of the Unexplained from the Reader's Digest. A series of books now. This particular set is by the History Press, and this is their paranormal series. So Paranormal London, Paranormal Cumbria, Paranormal Persia, and so on and so on. There's a whole range of these, along with their Haunted series, and these are all guidebooks for specific locations. So they're excellent books if you're going somewhere and you just want to find out the sort of thing that's been happening in that area. So any of these books are great to dip into and out of prior to going on any trips. You'll notice I didn't mention Paranormal Edinburgh, which is also available. We've got some books which are literally classics in their field and are pretty much ancient, and really they've been kind of unpolluted by a lot of the more modern thinking. So here we've got Phantasms of the Living, and this is by some of the founders of the Society for Psychical Research. So this is a book that's over 100 years old, and it just records various basically ghost reports, hallucinations as they call them, things that are examples of spontaneous telepathy, all sorts of cases that they recorded when they canvassed their members way back in the 19th century. So that's an excellent book there. We've got another book, and this is a classic in its field. This is 20 Cases Suggestive of a Reincarnation, Ian Stevenson. This is an early version of this book. There are other versions of this that he wrote with more and more evidence, but again, this is the early thoughts and the early cases that he presented from all around the world, and they show his investigations, some firsthand, some other people did for him. Some were fairly recently after the case of reincarnation was first shown by the individuals. So a fascinating book on a fascinating subject there. Another fascinating subject for me is the Dyatlov Pass. And again, there are a number of books there. And one of the best I've read on the Dyatlov Pass is this one, Dead Mountain, the untold true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. And this particular one is a lot less sensational than some of the other books. I do like books that are basically single issues, in that they look at one case and they spend quite a lot of time digesting that. I think we're all getting used to the fact that on television you'll usually have a show, and over an hour-long part of a show you'll see perhaps 3 or 4 cases, so you only get a few minutes for each one. So to totally invest yourself into one particular subject is an absolute luxury nowadays, and this is a great one for the Dyatlov Pass incident. There's one book I've got here which, as much as for the information that it contains, putting it up as a favorite of mine simply for what it provokes in me in terms of my memories. And this is a catalogue of one of the expositions of the Shroud of Turin. This was from the year 2000, and basically this was the book that I bought when I went to see the Shroud itself. So, you know, I bought this in Turin. I can't remember if I bought it before I saw the Shroud or if I actually saw the Shroud first and then bought this, but as well as all the fantastic information, the beautiful pictures it's got in, the various reports it covers, etc., etc., it also reminds me of the time I actually saw the Shroud myself. Another single issue book here, and this book I'm putting in, again, it's a favorite topic of mine, but it's also such a beautiful book that I can't fail to put it in the list here. And this is the Voynich manuscript, edited by Raymond Clements. And one of the advantages of this book is it gives not quite life-size, but it does give a full color representation of the actual Voynich manuscript. So you've got basically the whole book, including the bits where the actual book falls out into several pages over one. Those bits are represented as well. So this is a beautifully produced book, and it's an excellent indication of what the real thing looks like. Going back in time now for this particular book, and it's a one that has a strong place in my heart. This is not my original edition. This is a subsequent copy, and this is The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail by Bagent, Lee and Lincoln. And this is the one that essentially, or one of the ones that essentially kicked off the whole Dan Brown Da Vinci Code stuff. And this book, it's excellent. It's a real adventure story. You might disagree with some of the conclusions that they come up with, but at the time that it was being thought of, at the time it was being produced, it really was a trailblazing book. And this particular one is the illustrated edition, so lots of lovely pictures inside as well. I feel we have to mention him. He hasn't been mentioned so far, but the books of Charles Fort. And rather than show one individual one, I've cheated a bit and gone for the collected works. Some people don't like his style of writing. Some people don't like his sense of humor. Personally, I'm happy with both of those things. And I'm also enormously happy with the wealth of topics that he includes in each of his books, and also the approach that he takes. And if you haven't read any of his works, give them a try. I'd really recommend them. Fort was a collector of information and published a heck of a lot, as we've seen in the books there. And another person who collected information in the same way as Fort and published all of the material is William Corliss, and here's just one of his books. I've got 2 bookshelves completely full of his books, and these have much less of a commentary in them than the Fort books. They are just a continuation of scouring through the materials that Fort looked at, but carrying on his work. So it's not a replication of his work in the sense that we look at the same things. It's things that are more recent than the work of Fort, and there are some excellent books in the series. So my last book is one that I thought was a lot older than it actually was when I looked at the copyright date. And this is The Sign and the Seal, A Quest for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. And this is by Graham Hancock. And Graham Hancock started off as a journalist for, amongst others, the Sunday Times and what have you. And he then used those journalistic skills to do a search for the sign of the Ark of the Covenant throughout the world. And this is the story of that quest. And again, it's a book that some people will quite happily disagree with. It started off the alternative history side of Graham Hancock, which is the side that he's now well known for. And it's an absolutely excellent book, very well laid out, very logically put forward, and just a really good read. And despite the size of it, it's actually a fairly quick one to get through. That's not because it's got large text or anything, because it hasn't, but it is just such a good read. I would thoroughly recommend this. So that's my last one. So hopefully there are some books that will encourage you to seek them out and to have a look at them. If there aren't, then perhaps you could give us your own recommendations in the comments section below. We've had a range of meetings online. We're continuing to do that for the moment, and our next meeting, as has already been mentioned, is Scott Lyle, who will be talking on Bigfoot. So thank you everyone who's contributed to this evening's session, and thank you in particular for producing these things at such short notice. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone.